It started with an answer that should have been impossible. She had knocked on the window of his motorcycle on the seventh night. Not timid, not hesitant, the specific knock of a woman who has watched something she doesn't understand for 7 consecutive evenings and has decided that tonight she is going to understand it. He had rolled it down. She had said, "Why are you here?" And he had told her. She had stared at him for a long time. She said, "How do you know that?" He said, "A man in a bar 3 weeks ago, he was talking about you." He looked at the street. He was telling someone what he was going to do when you stopped being careful. She was very still. He said it again, because it had to be said again. Because the first time a person hears a thing like this, they are still deciding whether it is real. He said he knew when you let your guard down. He said you'd been at that address for 4 months, and you didn't know he'd found it. He said he was going to wait until you felt safe. She put her hand on the window frame. He looked at it. The hand, the knuckles white, the specific physical response of a woman who has heard something she already knew somewhere and is now having the knowing confirmed. She said, "What did you do?" He said. "I came here," she said. Every night," he said. She looked at the street, at the ordinary Tuesday darkness of a street in Clarkson, Tennessee, that had been ordinary for 7 consecutive evenings, and had felt to her slightly less ordinary each time she went to the window before bed and found the motorcycle at the curb, and did not know whether to be afraid of it or not been afraid of it. She had also, in a way she could not explain, felt safer with it there. Now she knew why. What she did not yet know, what she would not understand until the following morning, when the answer to why had had 7 hours to complete itself, was that the man in the motorcycle had not been alone in his decision to be here, that the bar conversation 3 weeks ago had been heard by more than one person, that the thing she had spent 4 months hiding from had, while she was busy hiding, acquired a very different kind of attention than she had known how to find for herself. She was about to find out. Clarkson, Tennessee, sits in the middle part of the state, where the land flattens toward the western lowlands, and the towns have the specific character of places that were neither big enough to grow nor small enough to stay the same, always in a state of partial transition, always keeping some of what they had while adding something they weren't sure about. The streets in the older neighborhoods were wide and tree-lined in the way of streets planted in the 1950s, when shade was considered a gift you gave, the future, and the trees had grown into that gift and delivered it, so that in summer the neighborhoods were cool and in November they were bare, and the street lights reached all the way to the pavement. On Sycamore Street, in the second-floor apartment of a building that had been converted from a single-family house sometime in the 1980s, and had never quite recovered its dignity, a woman named Addie Foss had been living for 4 months. Not in the apartment for 4 months, in Clarkson for 4 months. The apartment was the third she had rented in those months, each one in a different town, each one chosen with the specific criteria of a woman who was trying to be unfindable. No lease in her name, utilities in a cousin's name, a job that paid cash and asked no questions, and did not require identification beyond what the tax form required, which she had provided with the careful accuracy of someone who cannot afford to attract the kind of official attention that inaccuracy produces. She was 38 years old. She had been 38 for 6 weeks and had spent the birthday alone, which was not how she would have chosen it, and which had been, of the many things she had not chosen in the last 2 years, one of the harder ones to absorb. She was 5'6" and lean in the way of someone who has lost weight they were not trying to lose, with dark eyes that had the specific alertness of a person who has been paying attention to things that required paying attention to for long enough that the alertness had become permanent. Not anxiety, not fear, but the operational mode of a woman who has learned that the difference between noticing and not noticing can be material. She worked at a bakery on the main street in Clarkson. She had started 3.5 months ago, walking in on a Tuesday morning when the owner, a woman in her 60s named Bev, who had been running the bakery alone since her husband left and who had, in the intervening years, developed a specific and reliable instinct for people who needed a chance and people who needed watching, had looked at her and said, "Can you be here at 5 tomorrow?" She had said yes. She had been there at 5 every morning since. She was good at the work, precise, reliable, the specific kind of worker who learns what needs doing and does it without being reminded, and Bev had noticed this with the approval of a woman who has managed people long enough to know that reliability is rarer than it looks and worth more than it gets paid. They had reached, in 3.5 months, the particular understanding of two women who do not need to explain themselves to each other because the explaining has been done by how they work. Bev did not know why Addie had come to Clarkson. Addie had not told her. Bev had not asked. The thing she had was a specific small habit that had nothing to do with her situation. She baked at home on Sunday afternoons. Not the bakery kind of baking. That was the bread and the pastry and the things that required precision and temperature and timing. The home baking was different. She made her grandmother's recipe for tea cake, which required a bowl and a wooden spoon and nothing electric, and she made it in the small kitchen of the second-floor apartment on Sunday afternoons while the radio played, and when it was done she wrapped half of it and left it on Bev's doorstep Monday mornings, because Bev had mentioned once that it was her mother's recipe too, though she hadn't made it since. Bev had not mentioned this more than once. Addie had been leaving the package every Monday since. She had been at her window on the first night, a Tuesday, 2 weeks after the birthday she had spent alone, looking at the street before she locked the door and turned off the light, the check and confirm she had been doing at every address for 2 years, when she had seen the motorcycle. It had been parked at the curb across the street. A man on it or in it. She had not been able to tell from the second floor in the dark whether the man was in the saddle or simply standing beside it, only that there was a figure there, large, the specific size of a large man, not moving. She had stood at the window for a long time. She had not called anyone. She had gone to bed. She had not slept for most of the night. On the second night it was there again. On the third night she had watched from behind the curtain for 40 minutes before the light and the angle convinced her the man was sitting on the motorcycle, not moving, facing the street in a way that suggested watching rather than waiting, and she had tried to decide whether there was a difference. She had decided there was. She was not certain she had decided correctly. On the fourth night, she had called the cousin whose name was on the utilities and said, "Is there anything I should know about?" The cousin had said no. She had not said who or what she was asking about, because the cousin did not know the full shape of the situation, only that Addie needed her name on some paperwork and had not explained why. On the fifth night she had gone to the window and looked for the motorcycle, and it had been there, and she had looked at it for a long time and had felt, in a way she could not entirely account for, that the presence of it was not what she was afraid of. She had been afraid of many things for 2 years. This was not one of them. That distinction, which she could feel without being able to justify, was what had kept her from calling the police on nights 1 through 6. That and the fact that calling the police was a complicated calculation for someone in her particular situation, which she had been making and remaking for 2 years, and which never came out the same way twice. On the seventh night she had gotten her coat and gone downstairs and knocked on the window. Before I tell you who he was and how he had come to be on Sycamore Street for 7 consecutive nights, subscribe right now if you're new and drop your city in the comments. I want to see where this story goes. I read everyone now. Back to Clarkson, back to the curb on Sycamore Street, because the man on the motorcycle had a name and a reason and a bar conversation 3 weeks ago that he had not been able to leave where it happened. I need you to know who he was before you hear what happened on the 8th night. His name was Foster Raines. He was 50 years old and had been with the volunteer chapter, Iron Cross, out of Nashville for 15 years, 12 of them as the chapter's road captain, which meant he knew the roads of Middle Tennessee the way a person knows their own. Hands. He was tall and not quite as broad as he used to be, having shed the bulk of his early 40s in favor of something leaner, and he had the face of a man who has been outdoors in all kinds of weather for all kinds of reasons, and has stopped having opinions about the weather. He had gray at his temples and a jaw that was set the way jaws get set when they have made certain decisions and stopped revisiting them. He was carrying the thing that all of them carry, the specific weight that the framework of a life spent riding cannot quite distribute. A brother lost 3 years ago on I-40, a clean road. No fault. The kind of thing that doesn't have a reason and requires you to decide whether you are going to spend the rest of your life needing one. He had decided not to need one. He was still deciding. He had been at the Red Oak Bar in Nashville 3 weeks ago for a chapter member's birthday, sitting at the far end of the bar in the way of a man who was present at a social occasion and not quite in it, when two men had come in and taken the stools beside him, with the easy confidence of people who believe their conversations are private because they are speaking quietly. They were not speaking quietly enough. Foster Raines had the particular quality of stillness that makes people forget he is listening. He had listened. The man on the left, mid-30s, the kind of compact that suggested specific rather than general fitness, with the manner of someone who had been told things did not count unless they were done correctly, had been telling the man on the right about a woman he used to know. He had been telling it with the specific, patient, proprietary detail of a man who has not relinquished something he considers his and does not intend to. He had said the address. He had said the bakery. He had said the name. He had said she had been there for 4 months and didn't know he'd found it. And he had said what he intended to do when she felt safe, which was the sentence that had made Foster Raines set down his beer. He had not turned around. He had not confronted the man. He had sat at the bar and listened until the two men left, and then he had looked at the bar and thought about what he had just heard, and he had taken out his phone and looked up the address the man had said, and looked up the bakery and looked up Clarkson, Tennessee, and then he had sat for a while longer. He had driven past the address the following Thursday. He had seen the light in the second-floor window. He had come back Tuesday. He had come back every night since. He was not sure on the first 3 nights what he was doing there. He was not her family. He was not her friend. He did not know her. He had heard a stranger say her name in a bar and had known, without deciding to know it, what that name and that address and that bakery and that 4 months meant in the specific language of a man who describes a woman in terms of when she stops being careful. He knew what it meant because his sister had been described the same way 14 years ago, and Foster had not been in the bar that night. He had not been anywhere that night. He had not known. He had found out 3 days later, from a phone call that he kept in a room of his memory that he did not enter willingly, and he had arrived in time for the hospital, but not in time for the night before it, which was where the arriving would have mattered. He had been to that bar on Sycamore Street every night for 7 nights. He had not been sure it was enough, and had not been sure it was his place, and had been coming anyway, because those two uncertainties together had not amounted to a reason to stop. On the 7th night, the woman had knocked on his window. He had told her. She had stood at the window frame with her knuckles white, and he had waited. She said, "What's your name?" he said. "Foster Raines, Iron Cross Chapter, Nashville." She said, "You've been here every night." "Yes," he said. She said, "You don't know me." She said, "So why? I have a sister," he said. "I wasn't there when I should have been. I'm not going to not be here." She held the window frame. The street was very quiet. She said, "He knows where I am." Foster said, "He's going to come." "Yes," Foster said, "probably." She looked at the street. At the ordinary Tennessee darkness of a November night, the trees along Sycamore Street bare, the street lights reaching all the way down. She said, "I have to work at 5. He said, "I'll be here." She said, "You can't be here every night forever." He said, "I know." He looked at his phone. He said, "Can I make a call?" She looked at him. She said, "Right now?" "Right now," he said. "I should have made it 4 nights ago. I'm sorry I waited." She stepped back from the window. She said, "Make your call." The man's name was Owen Price. He was 36 years old, and he had been looking for Addie Foss for 14 months, across 3 states and 4 addresses, with the patient, systematic attention of a man who has decided that persistence is a virtue, and that the thing he is looking for belongs to him. He was compact and precise in his movements, and he had the confidence of someone who had not, in 36 years, been told by the world that his confidence was misplaced. He had been told once, by Addie. She had told him plainly, in the specific way of a woman who has decided that plainness is the only language that will reach someone who has declined to hear anything else. In the kitchen of the house they had shared on a Tuesday morning 14 months ago, she had said, "This is done. I am leaving. Do not contact me." She had said it looking directly at him, which was the kind of contact he had always tried to avoid, because he understood that her eyes made things real in a way that her words by themselves sometimes didn't. He had heard her. He had found her in 3 weeks. She had moved. He had found her again in 6 weeks. She had moved again. He had found her again in 4 months. She was getting better at moving. He was getting better at finding. He had found the Clarkson's address through a detail so small that Addie had not thought to protect it. A comment on a bakery's social media page made by a customer, describing the tea cake she had bought on a Monday morning, The one left on the doorstep wrapped in wax paper, old recipe, grandmother's. And Owen had read this the way he read everything, with the specific attention of a man who understood that hiding required consistency, and that consistency produced patterns, and patterns produced information. He had driven to Clarkson on a Thursday. He had found the bakery. He had not gone inside. He had found the address. He had driven past. He had gone back to Nashville and sat with the information for 3 weeks and told the man in the bar, because he told the man in the bar everything, because the man in the bar was the kind of friend who understood patience and the importance of not acting too quickly. He had not known there was a third person in that bar. He had come to Clarkson on a Wednesday night. He did not know about the motorcycle on the curb. He parked 2 streets over. He walked to Sycamore Street. Foster saw him from the curb. He had not gone home after the call. He had stayed on the motorcycle on Sycamore Street with the call made, the information relayed, and the night around him, and the second-floor light still on in the window above, because she had said he could not be here every night forever. And she was right, and the call he had made was the beginning of the answer to that problem. And in the meantime, he was here, and here was where he was staying. He saw the man come around the corner onto Sycamore Street at 11:47. He knew immediately, not from recognition. He had not seen the man's face in the bar, only his profile, the compact build, the specific way he moved that was the movement of someone navigating space as if it were already his. He knew from the way the man was walking, the specific pace, not a neighbor going home, not someone out for air, the pace of someone approaching something he has planned to approach and has arrived at and is executing the approach. Foster did not move. He did not stand. He sat on the motorcycle and watched the man come down Sycamore Street, and watched him slow when he saw the motorcycle at the curb, and watched him stop. The man looked at the motorcycle. He looked at Foster. Foster looked back. "Nobody," the man said. "Live here?" Foster said, "No." The man said, "Friend of someone in the building?" Foster said, "Something like that." The man looked at the building, at the second-floor window where the light was still on. He looked at Foster. He said, "I'm just looking for someone I know." Foster said, "At midnight," the man said. "Old friend, I was in the neighborhood." Foster looked at him. He said, "The person you're looking for, does she know you're coming?" The man's expression adjusted in a way that was not quite visible and was entirely present. He said, "It's a surprise." Foster said, "Go home." The man said, "Excuse me, go home," Foster said. "Tonight and tomorrow, and the day after." The man looked at him, at the cut, at the size, at the specific quality of a man who is sitting completely still and is not going to move, and he made the calculation that he was very good at making. He looked at the window again. He said, "This isn't your business." Foster said, "It is now." The man stood on the sidewalk. He said, "You don't know what you're—" "I know what I heard," Foster said. 3 weeks ago. Red Oak Bar. He watched the man's face. "I know what you said you were going to do when she felt safe. I know the address you said. I know the bakery you named." The street was very still. The man was very still. Foster said, "Go home." He did not say it louder. He did not say it with anything added to it. He said it the way you say a thing when the saying of it is sufficient, and you know the person on the receiving end knows it too. The man looked at the motorcycle. He looked at the window. He looked at Foster. He turned around. He walked back the way he had come. He went around the corner. He was gone. Foster did not move for a long time. The light in the second-floor window went out at 12:41. He sat on the motorcycle. At 1 in the morning he heard the sound he had been waiting for. Not from the street, from farther away, the particular low-rolling presence of engines on the outer roads coming in. The chapter had been 3 hours away. They had ridden it in 2.5. Engines. They came down Sycamore Street at 1:15 in the morning. Not the full arrival of a daytime crowd, but the specific quiet arrival of people who understand that the neighborhood is asleep, and that the job requires presence and not spectacle. 207 motorcycles moving through the streets of Clarkson, Tennessee, with the engines at the lowest register they could hold and still be moving. They parked on Sycamore Street and on the adjacent streets, and in the lot of the church on the corner and at the curb, in both directions from the building, spread out but connected, a net with Foster at its center. Engines off. The street went quiet. His chapter president, a man named Dalt, who had been running the volunteer chapter for 9 years, and who had answered the call 3 hours with 2 questions. "What do you need and when?" came to the curb. He looked at Foster. He said, he came, Foster said. He left. Dalt looked at the building. He looked at the street full of motorcycles. He said, "She know we were coming?" Foster said, "She knows I made a call." Dalt said, "How is she?" Foster said, "She's been handling it alone for 2 years." Dalt nodded. He said, "Not anymore." The second floor window opened. Addie Foss looked out. She looked at the street. She looked at 207 motorcycles parked on every available surface of Sycamore Street, and the surrounding blocks, the riders standing beside them in the November dark, the engines off, nobody moving. She looked at Foster. He looked up. He raised one hand. She put her hand on the window frame, the same frame she had held on the curb 40 minutes ago, the same white knuckle grip that was not quite steadiness, and was not quite fear, and was the specific grip of a woman who has been holding on for 2 years and has just understood that holding on is different when you are not holding on alone. She stood at the window for a long time. She said, not loudly, the street was quiet enough to carry it, she said, "Why did you come back? After 7 nights. Why tonight?" Foster said. "Because tonight was when it mattered." She was quiet. She said, "He was here." "Yes," Foster said. She was quiet for a long time. She said, "Is he coming back?" Foster thought about the man on the sidewalk and the moment of calculation and the particular look of someone who has just understood that the situation has changed in a way he did not account for. He said, "I don't think so," she said. "What happens tomorrow?" he said. "Some people I know want to talk to you about options, legal ones. There's a woman named Petra who does this work. She's on her way from Nashville. She'll be here in the morning." Addie looked at the street. She said, "I've been invisible for 2 years." "I know," Foster said. She said, "I got good at it." "I know," he said. She said, "I'm tired of it." She looked at the 207 motorcycles and the 207 people standing in the quiet of a November street in Clarkson, Tennessee, who had ridden 3 hours in the dark because a road captain had made a call, and the call had been the right call. She said, "I'm going to make tea cake tomorrow, for everyone." She paused. "There's a kitchen downstairs with a big oven. I'll need to start at 4. Dalt, who was standing beside Foster and had heard this, said, "We'll be here at 4. She looked at him. She said, "I don't know your name," he said. "Dalt, volunteer chapter president, Nashville." She said, "Thank you, Dalt," he said. "Thank Foster. He's the one who sat on a curb for 7 nights. She looked at Foster. She said, "I know." She looked at the window frame. "I saw him every night. I didn't know what to think." Foster said, "What did you think?" She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I thought it was either the most frightening thing I'd ever seen or the safest. I couldn't figure out which." She looked at him. "Then I decided to ask." He said, "I'm glad you did." She said, "So am I." She closed the window. The light came back on. At 4 in the morning, the kitchen light came on downstairs. Dalt found Foster still at the curb at 4:15. He said, "She's in the kitchen." Foster said, "I know. You going in?" Foster said, "In a minute." He sat on the motorcycle on Sycamore Street in the November cold and looked at the lit windows of the building where a woman had spent 4 months being unfindable and had been found by the wrong person, and then, without planning it, found by enough of the right ones to matter. He thought about his sister. He thought about the bar 3 weeks ago, and the address and the name and the bakery, and the specific sentence about what the man intended to do when she felt safe. He thought about what feeling safe was supposed to mean, and what it had cost Addie Foss to protect it for 2 years, and what it cost a person to stop protecting it alone. He thought about the kitchen light. He got off the motorcycle. He went inside. Owen Price drove back to Nashville that night. He called a lawyer in the morning. The lawyer, having reviewed the situation with the specificity that lawyers apply to situations that have produced witnesses, phone records, and a documented bar conversation relayed by the chapter road captain in a signed statement made to Petra's office, advised him in the careful language of legal counsel that the concept of protected communication did not extend to statements made in a public bar to another party, and that the existing no-contact order in Addie Foss's name, which she had obtained 6 months ago, and which had, until this conversation, not been vigorously enforced because enforcement required disclosure of her location, was now being supplemented by a motion to extend and strengthen it in 3 states, and that his client would be wise to comply with it. He complied. Petra Webb, who had driven from Nashville and arrived at 6 in the morning and eaten 2 pieces of tea cake and spent 4 hours with Addie and a legal pad, had the extended order filed by Thursday and the Nashville Police Department's Domestic Incident Unit notified by Friday. The unit had jurisdiction over Owen Price's county of residence and had, as it turned out, a file. The file was added to Owen Price was not heard from again. Addie Foss remained in the second-floor apartment on Sycamore Street. She remained at the bakery, where Bev, who had been told a carefully edited version of events the following Thursday, when Addie came in and sat in the chair beside the bread rack and said, "I should tell you something," had listened with the specific focus of a woman who has been running a bakery alone for a long time and knows when a person is telling her something important, and had said when Addie finished, "You should have told me sooner," Addie said. "I know," Bev said. "You're staying. It was not a question," Addie said. "If that's all right," Bev said. "It's been all right since the first Tuesday." On Sunday afternoon, Addie made tea cake in the small kitchen of the second-floor apartment on Sycamore Street and wrapped half of it and left it on Bev's doorstep on Monday morning, the way she had been doing for 3.5 months, because some things you keep doing whether or not the situation changes, because the situation changing is not a reason to stop doing the thing that was right before it changed. Foster Raines came back to Clarkson one more time, not for a week, not parked at the curb overnight. He came on a Saturday in February, with Dalt and 3 others, to have lunch at Bev's bakery because Dalt had mentioned it twice, and Bev's pecan rolls had, in the intervening months, developed a reputation that extended, as these things do, along the roads that bikers ride. Addie brought out the tea cake. She set it on the table in front of Foster. He said, "You didn't have to," she said. "I know." She sat down. "How's your sister?" He looked at her. He said, "She's good. She's in Memphis. She has a bakery, too, actually," Addie said. "Tell her the wooden spoon matters. For the tea cake, electric mixer is faster, but the spoon is better." He said, "I'll tell her," she said. "And tell her I said thank you." He looked at her. She said, "She doesn't know me." "But tell her anyway," he said. "What for?" She said, "For having you as a brother." She went back to the kitchen. He ate the tea cake. He thought about the 7 nights and the call he should have made earlier, and the thing he had not done 14 years ago when it would have mattered for someone else, and about sitting at a bar and hearing a name and an address and deciding, without quite deciding, that this time he was going to be somewhere. He had been somewhere. It had been enough. He rode back to Nashville in the February afternoon with the road ahead of him and the thing he had been carrying for 15 years. Not gone, never gone, but lighter, now in the specific way that weights become lighter when you find out they can be carried towards something rather than just carried. The pecan rolls were, he told Dalt on the road back, everything they were supposed to be. Dalt said he had been trying to tell him. The road went on ahead of them, long and straight and lit at the edges by the February sun, and they rode it at the pace of people who know where they're going and are not in a hurry to arrive before they've had the ride. There are things we hear in bars that we carry home, set on the shelf, and don't act on. And there are things we hear that we cannot put down. Foster Raines heard a name and an address and a sentence about waiting until someone felt safe, and he put his beer down and drove to Clarkson and parked on a curb. For 7 nights. Because some things you can't set on the shelf once you've heard them. Because some people have been invisible long enough. Because being somewhere is sometimes the whole of what is required. If this story reached you today, if you believe that showing up, quietly and without explanation, is sometimes the most important thing a person can do, hit like and share this with someone who needs to know that someone is watching the street. Subscribe so you're here for the next one. And drop a comment below. Tell me about a time someone watched out for you without being asked, or a time you were the one watching. I want to read everyone.